Hello, everybody. This is AK. I'm back. So, yesterday I made a video about how DBS, UOB, and OCBC are overbought, and I ended up talking only about DBS. I forgot to talk about OCBC and UOB. So this is a video to make up for that mistake, for that oversight. Well, just like DBS, OCBC, and UOB are also very overbought, right? We can see that in the chart, right? So I'm also not adding to my positions in OCBC and UOB at current prices, and if I were to add, I will wait for a pullback. And at the moment, just looking at the chart, I can tell that OCBC's immediate support is probably 1550. It's higher than 1550. It might be about $16, right? And 1550, 15440, that it would be a stronger support, right? Immediate support is not as strong. It's about $16. In the face of some bad news, we could see price retracing all the way to 1540 or 1550 per share. Of course, my friend who got in at 1527 per share made a video about that. He's very happy, right, and wants to buy me a buffet dinner, but I say no. Buffet dinner is too much for me these days. I say I'll pass, right. When I go to a buffet, right, I'm very chow con. I usually end up overeating, and then I'll suffer the next day. Right. So when I made the video about my friend getting the shares at 1527 per share not too long ago, it's quite recent. I also said that, if we haven't gotten our foot in the door yet, that's a fair price to pay for OCBC. It wasn't expensive. It was a fair price for a good business, right? So whoever got in at that price, and thought like he would be getting a fixed deposit, 8 months fixed deposit with an interest rate of 5.7% per annum. Well, congratulations to you too, right? So I'll leave a link in the description box below to the video in case you haven't seen it yet. I find it quite entertaining. Then what about UOB? Well, UOB, I see the immediate support at around $33 to $33.20 or $33.50. Around there is a box now. Okay, it's a zone of support for UOB share price. So it's around 33 to 33.50 per share. And if I were to add to my position, that's also where I would be looking at, right? And of course, for those of us who haven't gotten our foot in yet, or if we think that we haven't gotten a big enough exposure to OCBC and UOB, those are the prices worth looking at, right? Because the uptrend is still intact, and so any time the prices go back to test supports would be a reasonable place to increase exposure, right? And the next thing I want to talk about is IREIT Global. I think some viewers might think that I've abandoned the REIT. Given my spate of videos on why the banks make better investments than REITs, and frankly, all those videos, the things I've said, right, they apply to IREIT Global as well. I mean, IREIT Global is a REIT, right? So it's true that the banks make better investments than IREIT Global too, right? IREIT Global pays out 90% of its distributable income to shareholders. IREIT Global retains 10% of its distributable income, and still is able to give us currently almost a 10% distribution yield, right? And I've said this in the past before. That's why one reason why I like IREIT Global, because it has a very strong balance sheet. It doesn't pay out all its distributable income to shareholders. It retains 10%, right? And for working capital and in their war chest, what have you, like, basically, right? And also they do not issue fees to the manager in units. They actually pay the manager in cash, right? So what happens is we don't get our stakes diluted, and what we see them paying out half yearly as passive income, right, to the shareholders. What you see is the real dividend, right? That means it's not financially engineered to be higher, right? And because REITs can pay their managers using units, then they have more cash to distribute to their shareholders, right? With IREIT, no. What we get is really the income that's available for distribution after they have paid their manager in cash, not in units, right? So I like the REIT. Is well run. It has a strong balance sheet, and I also like it because I believe that the properties, especially the one in Berlin, is severely undervalued. And this is something I've talked about many times before. And now that the tenant, the master tenant, is leaving, right, and from January the property in Berlin will be vacant, IREIT will be able to unlock their properties true value, right? And as it is, they already found a hotel operator and a long-term stay hospitality operator to take up, if I'm not mistaken, 40% of the space, and they are going to be paying like 100% more in terms of asking rent than the outgoing tenant, right? And this just proves that what I've said all along about the property being severely under-rented is true. But of course, we already got a hint of that when the outgoing tenants paid like 40% higher in rent for a 6 months extension, right? Because their contract was negotiated years ago, and it was locked in at a ridiculously low price, right? So IREIT Berlin property is the one that will be a game changer, right? And I'm waiting to see how they unlock even more value from that property, because more than half of their properties still remains to be rented out. But IREIT has to spend 1 year refurbishing the entire property first, right, before we can see results, which means in 2025 we will be missing income from the Berlin property, which is a major contributor to IREIT's income, right? I think it contributes 20-25% of IREIT's income, right? So at the moment, at the current price, I think it's what, 28 cents. The yield, distribution yield for IREIT Global is about 10%. 10%. And when I first talked about IREIT Global so many moons ago, the distribution yield was 8%. But of course, the distribution yield has expanded because the unit price has come down, right? And I talked about this a few months ago, how the unit price have come down by almost 40% since the beginning of the year, and how I'm nursing a very big paper loss when it comes to IREIT Global. But it doesn't bother me, because like I say, I try to be a better investor by focusing on valuation, and the price movement should not bother me, as long as I'm sure that that investment is a good investment. And in terms of IREIT Global, I look at it as an asset play, as a recovery play, because the Berlin property is underappreciated, and as a recovery play because once they manage to refurbish their property and turn it around, right, prospective tenants will be paying a much higher rent for that property, right, than before, right? So short-term pain for long-term gain, and at the moment, the distribution yield is fast approaching 10%, but missing that contribution from the Berlin property in 2025, we could see a reduction of 20-25% income for IREIT Global, which means the distribution yield should correspondingly reduce, right? Which is why I'm not adding to my investment in IREIT Global at the moment. But if the price should reduce by, say, another 20% from here, which means IREIT Global goes down to like 23 cents per share. That means based on the current cash flow, is still able to give us a 10% distribution yield if the unit price goes down to 23 cents. That is missing the Berlin Properties contribution. I think that would be a screaming buy for me, because that would take the worst case scenario into consideration. That means the Berlin property remains vacant forever, and I'm still able to get a 10% yield, and that's like at 23 cents per share, all else being equal. But of course, the Berlin property is not going to stay vacant forever. Once it recovers, the distribution per unit will recover, and the yield will go up quite a lot, right? And why am I using 10% as a yardstick, as a guide for me to buy more? Because the earnings yield for the banks is about 10%, DBS, OCBC and UOB. So an attractive price for a REIT, in my opinion, would be when their distribution yield approximately is the same as the earnings yields of the banks. Right, because the REITs pay out 90 to 100% of their income to give us the distribution yield, and the banks pay out only 50% of their earnings to give us dividend yield. So, and the banks can now give you about 5% dividend yield, and their earnings yield is about 10%. So if the banks were to pay out 100% of their earnings as dividends, then the yield will be closer to 10%. So then you'll be on par in terms of attractiveness to the local banks. That's why I use a 10% as a guide, right? So that's an update for IREIT Global, for those of you who are invested in it as well, and for those of you who might be looking at it, right? So now you know what price I'm looking at to add more to my investment in IREIT Global. I've certainly not abandoned it. I still like the investment, but all investments are good investments at the right price. So if AK can talk to himself, so can you. Bye-bye.